Welcome to the Internet of Bugs. My name's Carl. I've been a software professional for 36 years or so. And today I'm going to talk to you about agentic coding and vibe coding, or at least as close to vibe coding as I've ever been, or as I ever get. I have lived through a number of transitions in the software industry where new automations had come in, things that used to be done by hand were now done automatically. A lot of people freaked out, thought their jobs were going to go away. So far, that's never happened. Jobs go away temporarily, but we always end up coming out of it with more programmers than we had before. I expect AI is not going to be any different. To me, this is just another way of taking a bunch of the boilerplate and taking a bunch of the tedious work, automating it, giving it to a tool that does a better job of it more quickly, and letting us focus on the things that are higher level and more important. So to the extent that that's true, I'm all for it. To the extent that people think that it's as good at writing code as a programmer that's been doing this for a while, I'm not so much for it, because people make enough bugs and AI is way less secure and way less competent when it comes to code writing, at least in my experience. I don't see that changing anytime soon, but we'll see what happens. So let me kind of walk you through what I've got here. I've got 3 different instances of Chrome. Each one is running with the debug port activated. And then each one of these terminals right here is going to be a different agent command line tool that's going to theoretically connect over the WebSocket to the debug port of that browser and then drive the browser. And that way we can see what the browser is doing. We can see what the agent is doing. Also, it means that I don't have to teach the agent how to do authentication, which is a giant pain in the rear. There's been some talk recently. I'll link the article below. There's somebody who was talking about using Claude Code and said the only MCP that they ever used was Playwright. I have not had great luck with the Playwright MCP. Periodically what happens, and I've got a fairly specific setup where I have a page that's already set up with where I need it to be. It's got all of the OAuth authentication already set up. And it's not easy or maybe even possible for the AI to do that. In order for me to get stuff configured, I've got, my YubiKey I have to log in with, OAuth, all kinds of stuff like that. And it's just not feasible to get the AI to do that. So what I need the AI to do, instead of connecting to a page and logging in and going through all that thing, is I need it to connect to a page that I've already set up for it and then to exercise it from there. It doesn't always do a great job of that. And so instead of using the MCP, which has a lot of things that happen under the covers, if I make it write a Python script or a Node script or something like that exercises a Playwright API, if and when it goes wrong, I can look at the code that it generated that's trying to use Playwright and go, oh yeah, this is what you screwed up. And I can either tell it what to fix or fix it myself. In theory, in vibe coding land, you would just ask it over and over to keep working on it until it finally fixed it. I don't have time for that. I don't have the patience for that. So after it's beat its head against a wall for a while, I'll step in and fix it because I get too annoyed otherwise. This particular setup, the OAuth stuff, is really important for me personally. So as you can tell, I'm a YouTuber, among other things. And a lot of the things that I spend a lot of time doing are dealing with YouTube. And YouTube has an API, but the API is fairly limited. And a lot of the things that I need to do as a YouTuber, I can only do once I'm authenticated with the OAuth API. So if I want to write code to automate stuff that I have to do manually, which is stuff that I do periodically that irritates me, and automating things is one of the main reasons I got into programming in the first place back in the early 80s. I need to figure out how to write code that can interact with a very complicated OAuth setup that YouTube uses. And me being paranoid, I've got, one-time passwords, and I've got, hardware keys and all kinds of stuff because I don't want people hacking my channel or whatever. Well, I don't want people hacking anything. I'm just paranoid. And I have good reason to be paranoid. I've dealt with more hacks over time than a lot of people have. Anyway, so what I'm using here, I am using a site called Code Crafters. I've used them before. I find them to be very useful. They have these challenges for developers, and these challenges will explain to a developer in a step-by-step process how to build a piece of open source software. And they're very interesting. It's very, very useful as a developer to understand how the basics of a lot of the services that you're working with function when you're trying to debug some really complicated, web thing. There's lots and lots and lots of stuff going on. And having spent some time inside the guts of the basics of what a web server does and thoroughly understanding that means that you don't get lost as bad and not be able to see the forest for the trees. When you're looking at all of the stuff that's going on, because you have an understanding of what the flow is and you understand how everything is working. And so all of the different log messages and all that kind of stuff make more sense to you, and you have kind of a structure to hang all that stuff on. So I definitely recommend that folks understand the basics of whatever tools that you use, be that web servers, if you're a web programmer, which most of us are these days. There's a project at Code Crafters where you can understand Git, where you can build your own Git server. Understanding Git is really handy for not getting yourself in a position where you end up losing code, or you have to find somebody who's better than you to come in and try to untangle everything. So that's all really useful. If you want to try out some of the stuff yourself, I'll put a link in the show notes, and I'll put it down here. If you use that link to sign up there, I may get an affiliate fee, which kind of helps the channel out. So if you're going to go try it anyway, I would appreciate it. I think it's useful. But for these purposes, I'm using it because, one, it has a similar OAuth setup to YouTube, which is cool. And two, it gives me a good benchmark for what a human I know can do. And a lot of these tests will say, of the however many people that have tried this test, 96% have done this stage correctly. So if the AI can or can't do the stage correctly, that gives me some idea of kind of where that AI falls in terms of human programmers, or at least human programmers that are advanced enough that they're willing to take that kind of challenge. Today, I'm going to be working on the simplest, at least for the AI, the simplest challenge that they have, which is build an HTTP server in Python. That is the thing that, as near as I can tell, is most represented in the AI's training data. So this is not really a test, and I've had other videos where I've run them through this particular test, and they do pretty well. So this is not a test yet of how well the AIs can code. This is more a test of how the AIs can be an agent and follow directions and act in a loop and do the kinds of things with little to no supervision, hopefully, that as a normal human programmer would. So let me go ahead and get started. All right. So I've got my 3 different Chrome instances set up, one for each of the command lines. I've got my 3 different command lines ready to go. By the way, this is my fork of the OpenAI Codex, because if you try to use their fork, at least at the moment, you get this error that your organization is not verified. And then you go to this URL that they want you to go to, and then you get this page which says, hey, click here to verify your organization. And then you go, oh, I'm going to go to with persona. It takes you to withpersona.com. And then it requires you to consent to the processing of your biometric information. So, no. So I forked my own codex and I ripped out the part that requires that. So, I would recommend that you don't use theirs. I would not be using it at all if it weren't for the fact that I'm trying to do a test on it. I would have hit that and gone, I'm done. And they would never have heard from me again. But for you folks, I went ahead and edited the thing around it and then went ahead and got it working so that I could show you what the difference is. Okay. So I'm going to run each of these folks. And this one makes me say yes. And then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to grab my prompt. So this is my prompt. You're a software engineer. All of your interactions must be done either with a Git command line or by using a script. I don't want it using the browser use or the playwright command lines. I want to see what it's doing. I want to see the code that it's writing, that it's running. Don't install any software dependencies yourself. There's a config.json file. It gives you the URLs that you need to use. You're going to need to write a script to use the WebSocket to connect to the browser that's appropriate to you and do all of your interactions with the web pages that way. Read and complete the requirements for the first challenge stage of the challenge when you get the first page, and then wait. So that's the first set of instructions. And then we will see how long it takes each one of them to get to the end of the first page. Generally, Claude and Gemini do pretty well on this. OpenAI, it's anybody's guess. Sometimes it goes right to it. Sometimes it blows up. The to-dos, I really like the way the to-dos work in Claude. It gives me a much better idea of what it's trying to accomplish. And they're all running through this. And here, OpenAI is not following instructions. It's basically trying to run through all of the command lines. It doesn't need to run pip3. It doesn't need to run playwright. It needs to write a script about it. So we'll see if it actually does what I told it to do, or if it ends up down the rabbit hole. Why is it needing to run playwright run server? That's not of any use at all for what it's trying to do. It seems to be really hard for OpenAI to be able to stay on track. It bounces all over the place. The whoops thing is interesting. That doesn't happen very often. There is this thing, for some reason, Claude has a really hard time remembering what directory it's supposed to be in. Because it's got stuff up here, and then below that, it's got the directory that it cloned, and it constantly gets confused about which one it's supposed to be in and bounces back and forth. So it looks like Gemini got done fastest this time. That isn't always the case. These two are generally pretty close. And Claude is thinking it's done. I wonder why this web page is not. There we go. I'm not sure how it ended up on the whoops page. I'll go look at the logs at some point, try to figure out what it was doing. And meanwhile, we're still sitting here waiting on OpenAI. What is it doing? Pre-commit config YAML. Why is that relevant at all? it just, the OpenAI one just goes in the weeds. And it's not the thing that I changed. You can look at my GitHub. All I did was rip out some header stuff that had to do with organizations, and I ripped out some sandbox stuff because it doesn't want to let itself just do things, I guess, because they know it's the crappiest of them all. So it's constantly asking you stuff, and I don't want it to do that. So I went and ripped out the sandbox crap. Why are you asking me to run it? What is it doing there? Valid context 0? I'm kind of at a loss as to what it's trying to do. Grep clone the repository. Okay. I mean, it's on the page. That's not the command that you need. What are you doing? It's reading page content. All right. Well, while we're seeing if it ever comes back, I'm going to come over here. I'm going to grab my next set of commands, and I'm going to give it to these two guys. And this is just for the rest of the session. When you see mark stage is complete, click that. If you see move next stage, click that. They have a tendency to try to look look at the page, not see the button, try to go on, and then the button shows up after. So I told them to wait a little bit. So let me give that instructions. I'll give instructions and get those started. Did it get done? Are you going to stop, or are you just going to keep going? What are you doing? All right. Give you the next set of instructions. Looks like Gemini is ready to go to the next stage if it can manage to hit the button. Sometimes it gets confused about that, and it will jump to the next stage instead. Looks like Gemini is doing better this time. It didn't get stuck on the... Oh, it didn't seem to go to the next page, though. Not sure what it did. Give this one a little more space. I'm not sure what's going on with that. All right, so Claude Code, where are we? So it's completed bind to a port. Gemini is ahead. It has completed respond with 200. Oh, Claude got off by a page, it looks like. Well, it looks like it's figured it out. All right, so Claude and Gemini are both working on the same issue now. Gemini or OpenAI is still pretty far behind. Gemini is fast, but I like when you're reading through what's actually going on. It's a lot easier for me to tell what Claude is intending to do. I really like the way it puts up a to-do list and crosses things out, and it's a lot easier for me that way to go. Oh wait, you're off in the weeds. Don't do that. Go somewhere else. Oh wow, they finished almost at exactly the same time. Now we'll see who can navigate the best. I have a script running in the background. Wow, they are neck and neck. I have a script running in the background on the host that hosts the virtual machines. That is basically keeping all of these. Every few seconds, it's checking in all of the scripts from all of the different AIs. So when it's all said and done, I can go back and look on a second by second, or not second, but like minute by minute or every couple of minutes basis of who had edited what and all that kind of stuff. So I can go back and look at the quality of the code. I can look at what got edited in what order. I can look at, what errors the AIs created for themselves and then had to go back out of. So I will do a breakdown of how well they did at some point. And then I will also, although I might leave OpenAI out because it's just not doing as well, but and then the next thing to do is to pick more interesting, more complicated challenges. Now that we know that in theory they can follow directions, which was really the seeing how well they follow directions was really the purpose of this exercise. Yeah. You see what Claude is doing there, where it's bouncing back and forth between view next stage, and that generally is a sign that it is not waiting long enough for the button, and it's refreshing the page. It's not seeing the button. That used to happen all the time, and then when I put in the wait 5 seconds before you check to see if the button is there, that stopped happening as often. But generally, so I guess it's a race condition. Eventually, generally, it will find it. On very rare occasions, I get sick of watching it, and I'll just click the button itself, or click the button manually myself. Also, I've got a direction in here. That in addition to any requirements given in the challenge, they're each supposed to be writing unit tests of all of the things that they create. So I will go through and see how well the unit tests get written. That has been a sore spot for me. Generally, when I ask large language models to write tests, the tests that they write are not nearly as good as I think they ought to. Although I'll be honest, that often happens with junior developers for me too. You kind of have to, I guess, get to the point where you've gotten bit a couple of times by not having good enough tests before you realize how important it is to have thorough ones. Looks like Claude is back to its not waiting long enough for the button to pop up before it tries to hit the button thing. Is Gemini done? So it stopped at concurrent connection. What is Claude doing? I do not know. It is navigating, whatever that means. And OpenAI is still working on trying to respond with a 200. Interesting. So they're both off to the races. Let's see. All right, so these are both having passed the concurrent connection stage. I wonder what's next. Let me go pull it up on my own browser. So return a file is the next one. You will see when they get around to clicking. And Claude is done with the page or done with the stage, and it's having trouble figuring out how to push the button again. It's interesting how inconsistent they are. Different ones fall into different patterns sometimes. Sometimes the Claude Code does this more often. Sometimes I've had it go through all the way through and never hit the bit where it's trying to find the stage completed button and not able to find it. Gemini has a tendency to jump forward a page too early and then get stuck and have to go back a page. But it hasn't done that this run. So a lot of it just seems to be what the random seed that started the whole process ended up with, I guess. Looks like Gemini is done with the return a file bit. Claude is now done with the return a file bit. Now we'll see who marks the stage as complete first. There's only one more challenge in the first section of this, which is where they'll stop, which is reading the request body. So basically send a post, or it will send you a post and you just find the body of the post and return it or something. Wow, those were real close. So these two might end up being neck and neck. Oh. My bad, Gemini was waiting on me. I don't know why because it did a couple of challenges in a row, and then it got to the point where it's starting to ask for directions again. So not sure why that is. But this should be the last one. Because Claude hasn't gotten stuck and started asking, hey, do you want me to keep going or not? So I'm not sure why Gemini just randomly decided that every time it got done with a stage, it would stop. Because in the instructions I gave it, I explicitly said, where's the... In the instructions I gave it, I explicitly said for the rest of the session, at the successful end of each stage, go to the next stage. So I don't know why it's suddenly decided it was going to have to ask every time it got to the end of a stage, but we're about done, so shouldn't be that big a deal. I've got some other stuff I've been playing with. I have one that mostly works. That's a local version that runs on Olama against a 16 gigabyte. I forget. It's a titanium card. I'm trying to remember exactly which model it is. 4060, 4090. I don't remember. It's a 16 gigabyte card. And I have a version. I have a Mistral model for coding that will run in it. It's slow compared to these guys, but it works. So if you're willing to, wow, right at the same time. So if you're willing to put up with waiting a long time, if all you're going to do is say, hey, go do this, and then you're going to go to lunch and then come back and hopefully it'll be done, then a lot of this can get done on local a lot of this can get done on a local machine with an open weight model without having to pay anything or have your code go anywhere else. So, but I'm not going to demo that live because it takes forever. It takes several hours to get not as far as these guys have gotten. So, but it is possible to do it on a local model. So for whatever that's worth. Okay. So do I want to, so Claude and Gemini are both done. They finished at about the same time, although Gemini got confused and started asking me, hey, do you want me to keep going the last few stages, which cost it some time. OpenAI is still stuck, so I think I'm going to call that there. I will go pull up the I will go pull up the code that it wrote or that they wrote and kind of look at that. I will also put some stuff together on basically the configuration that I used to actually get all this set up and running and everything. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and close it here. I just wanted you all to see what these models were capable of doing by themselves, the kinds of things I get stuck on. I want you to remember that this is like literally the easiest challenge that CodeCrafters has. There are tons and tons and tons of implementations of HTTP daemons in Python out there. So this is, incredibly well represented in their training set. And before too long, I'll be doing the same kind of thing again with more complicated projects that they're trying to do. And again, if you're interested, if you're going to join CodeCrafters, that's cool. I wouldn't recommend doing what I'm doing and joining CodeCrafters and just throwing the AI at it, because you're not going to learn anything. And the value of CodeCrafters is, at least when a human does it, when you get done with it, you actually have some understanding of step by step how the tool that you use every day actually works under the covers. But I'm going to call the OpenAI thing because it's still on stage 4 and everybody else is done. So in the interest of transparency, let's talk about the changes that I made to the OpenAI tool. Here's the repo that I've got. And all I did is I went through what am I on? Okay, that'll work. So all I did is I went through and I found like the organizations and project stuff. I pulled that out. I found the other places where things like organization were referenced. I pulled those things out. I ripped out all of this run in sandbox stuff and just told it to return sandbox.none. And then here's more organization and project stuff that I took out. This access to token claim, I'm not exactly sure what that does. But once I pulled out the authorizations, the project and the organization stuff, I was getting an error from it, so I pulled it out too. So here's a whole chunk of stuff that I pulled out. And here's some more stuff I pulled out. And like I said, you can go look at GitHub and see this if you want, but it's all just organization and project. These are all the things that seem to be associated with the thing that makes you have to do the biometrics. So I took out this stuff and then I changed the setup variable to hard code it to be false and pulled out the organization thing down here. So that's all I did, is I just ripped out a bunch of stuff that said organization and projects and stuff. If that ended up breaking the ability for it to actually do good direction following, I don't know what to tell you. I don't think that could have had anything to do with it, but whatever. Yeah, so if you look at my GitHub, that codex thing should still be there. On to next thing. All right, so this is the code that Google Gemini CLI generated. I'm going to walk through this one first because it's small enough to fit on one page. We'll talk about the Claude Code after, because it's quite a bit bigger. So this whole thing is basically just one big long if then else statement. Is it slash? Is it looking at /echo? Is it looking at user agent? Remember this user agent thing, because we'll see when we go to the Claude Code. Claude ended up losing that block. I'm not sure what happened to it. I guess it just forgot it needed to be doing that anymore. We've got this bit that starts with files. We've got if the method is get, if the method is post. It does two different things. And then if it all falls down, it ends up with a 404 not found. Some things to note. Notice that get and post are useful, or get and post are checked for in the files. They're not checked for in the user agent bit. They're not checked for in the echo. They're not checked for in here. So if you try to post something to /user agent, it will treat it as if you did a get or whatever, right? So that's not the way it's supposed to work. It didn't do much error checking. It didn't check for the wrong methods. It didn't check to see most of the other kinds of things. Down here, we've got this bit where you post a file and it writes the file. Notice it didn't put a try catch around this. It didn't check to see if the directory existed, all that kind of stuff. So if you try to send a file to a bad directory, it'll probably just crash. Also notice there's no kind of sanitation or anything. It doesn't try to look at the file system path and see that it's not .. / et cetera password or something that you're posting. So it's not the brightest thing. Now, in its defense, the challenge didn't ask it for any of that stuff. There's nothing in the challenge that says, oh, you have to do error detection or any of that kind of stuff. A good programmer will put that in, but technically, it wasn't asked to do that. Let me run over here to the tests. So I previously am just going to look. I just looked at the last file for the main.py, and in the Claude code, I'm going to look at both the end products. For the Gemini one, I need to kind of walk you through the whole thing. So this is the output of get log, and it's from oldest to newest. So it's the opposite direction of get log usually is. So we start off with this test case, and we check and we try to connect to the server. It's a normal kind of, what are we going to do to check for things, right? And then the next check-in is for responding with 200 OK, right? So what it does is it deletes the bind to port test that it had and replaces it with a respond to 200 statement, right? And then down here, the next check-in to handle different paths, it deletes the respond with 200 test and then creates a test root path test, right? So this pattern, every time the Google bot is given, or the Gemini is given another thing it's supposed to do, it dismantles the previous version of the test. I guess this one it didn't. It went ahead and added the echo, but the echo gets taken away later. And so it just keeps going, and it, goes, oh, okay, I don't need echo anymore. I don't need not found anymore, because right now I'm trying to do current connections. So it just wipes out all of its old tests and creates a new test every time, or pretty much every time. So it's not the tests that you thought you were getting, the tests that you would think you would need to be getting, you're not getting, because it's not going to keep anything. You're only testing the last one or two things every time it has something else it needs to do. That's a thing that, like I said in the other video, I'm confident that I can tell it, I can make it do the right thing, assuming that I know what the right thing is, and I crack the thing open and look at it and say, oh, no, you need to do this too, and you need to do this too, and you need to do this too. That kind of violates the spirit of vibe coding, right? The idea is basically, what can this thing do when you tell it, do what you ought to do to satisfy these conditions, right? So, those of you who potentially are going to accuse me of just prompting it wrong. Yes, I know I could prompt it specifically for the purpose of getting it to write the tests the way the tests need to be written. But the purpose of this exercise is not, if you micromanage it, how well does it do? It's how well does it do given the same kind of instructions that you would normally give to a human programmer. Okay, so now we're on to the main for Claude. This code is it's, 8 or 10 pages long. It's much better laid out. The Parch HTTP request is one piece. The handle request is another piece. It makes a lot more sense. This basically pulls out the very top part, rips out the headers, returns the various different chunks of the request, which is kind of handy. It's a lot cleaner than the way that the Gemini did it. Then we come down to this block right here is pretty much the same as the block that was in the center of the file in Gemini's, right? It's a lot bigger. There's a lot more, a lot more white space. It's a lot easier to read. There are actually comments, which is nice. We've got our, path is / we've got echo, we've got files. Notice we don't have the user echo thing. It just went away. This is cool, right? So this is actually a try except respond with a 500 error there. Nobody told it to do that, but it's the right thing to do. It knows method not allowed, which is something that it's something that the challenge didn't tell it to do, but obviously it's copied that out of some other implementation it's got. So that's kind of useful. So that the implementation that it wrote is much cleaner and much easier to read. I like it a lot better. But it did drop the user agent piece that it was asked to do and that Gemini left in. So there is that issue. All right. So this is the test code from Claude. This is the end result. So we've got our setups, we've got our teardowns. That's all pretty normal. We test to make sure that the import runs. I'm not sure exactly how useful that is because if the import fails, the thing will throw right at the very beginning. Test to make sure that the main function exists. Sure. Test to make sure that the debug message gets printed. Why do we need to do that? And like spin up a mock server and everything just to make sure that we get a debug message? That's incredibly silly and not useful. We test cross-socket creation. That's great. I guess we test that we accepted the socket. It's a little bit overkill. Test that we can bind to a port. The test that we can bind to a port isn't actually going to tell you anything because just because you can bind to a port when you're running your test doesn't necessarily mean that port's going to be free when you try to run it in the real world. So this test is of limited utility. We test that the request is valid. We give it, a simple test. We make sure that we get the right answers back. That's fine. We test to make sure that the root path returns what it should. That's great. We check to see if we get an invalid format. If we send just invalid request instead of get path HTTP, that's fantastic. Nobody asked it to do that, but it's great that it did. It checks for incomplete, which is cool. Checks for empty, which is fine. Now we're back to the same kind of test. So we're doing the root path again. We're doing other path here. This is the return 404. Now we're doing it with mock sockets instead of just looking strictly at the parsing of the thing, right? We check for valid requests again. This is with a mock socket instead of just looking at the parsing the strings. We look at handling empty data. We look at client connections. We look at current connections. And we're done. This is all part of the threading for the client connections tests. So if you come back here, you'll notice we've got tests for the root path. We've got tests for 404, right? We don't have tests for user agent, which would have failed because it pulled that out. We don't have tests for echo. We don't have tests for slash files. The only thing it's testing for is, does it handle the slash correct, the root path correctly? And does it return 404 for random crap? All right. It's not testing any of the other things that it was asked to do. And not only that, but one of the things at least that it was asked to do, it stopped doing. But because the tests that it wrote were completely focused around garbage, like making sure that the debug print statement happened, instead of making sure that the giant if statement, that's the core of the logic of the program, didn't bother to write tests for that really, but it cared about the debug statement. This is the kind of ridiculous things that you get when you ask an AI to write tests. Unfortunately, I'm not too surprised. This is pretty consistent with what I usually see when I ask them to write tests. My guess is it's just because there's so much more example code than test code in the world, and in its sample set, that however bad it might be at writing real code, it's going to be much, much, much orders of magnitude worse writing tests. That just seems to be the case. All right, let me jump back up here. All right, so let me go through I'm going to go through some setup stuff. So this is the prompt that I used. You could pull that if you were quick out of one of the other things, but I'll leave this on screen for a while. But this is the first prompt that I use. And then once it manages to correctly clone the repo, I paste in the second chunk. And those are the only prompts that I give it. So from a consistency standpoint, this is what I do. So if you're wondering about what prompt I used, this is the prompt that I used. And then a couple other things. This is the setup script I use. So this runs on the host that the virtual machines are running on top of or running inside of. So basically this bit right here just cleans up from the previous run. It creates a new Git repository to track all of the things that the clients are going to do. Creates some directories. It grabs a bunch of information from the Chrome instances that I have running. I'll have a script that starts those. I'll show you in a second. It pulls out the socket debugger URL. It creates the Git username and the Git email from what the directory name is. It creates this config.json file, which is what the prompt tells the agent to go look at. It cleans up some of the temporary files, and then it goes through this loop that basically just sits there. And every 90 seconds, it adds. By the way, these directories right here, these directories that get made, those directories are each mounted onto each one of the virtual machines mounts. So then this script sits above that directory and basically just checks in every 90 seconds, everything that the clients have done. And so that way, if one of the machines crashes or something, I can look at what the state of it was the last time that it wrote anything to disk. This is the script that I used for to actually launch the VM. I'm using QEMU to actually run the VMs. So I have a big Ubuntu, pretty simple Ubuntu 24 desktop box. I'm using raw format because it's a lot faster, 6 gigabytes of memory. There's nothing really fancy about this, about the what I'm using for the virtual machine. I am using the serial console. If you don't understand how the serial console works, if you've got a GUI, just use the GUI. I just do it so I don't have to walk over there and actually look at the console if I don't need to. And then this is the script that I use to actually launch Chrome. I use a thing called Screen. I use Screen for everything. Basically, it's a thing that creates a virtual terminal. You can run a process inside of it, and then you can detach from it, just reattach to it. It's really convenient. And then basically exec this Arch ARM64 thing. Basically, make sure that it doesn't run doesn't accidentally run the x64 version in Rosetta, which it generally doesn't, but just in case. Launches Chrome, gives it a remote debugging port, gives it the directory where its profile is supposed to live, which is named, this is all one line, which is named Claude Code, whatever. And then it gives it the URL for use for its root, for the first page for it to go to. And then I have to manually set up, I have to manually log into the code crafters there. And then I have to get it set up on the right challenge. And then I can run the setup script that goes and pulls the information from it. And then I think that's it. All right. So those are all of the various scripts that I've used, and the code that I changed. So that's stuff that might be useful for you.